At 4:11 in the afternoon, the sky over Larkspur Downs turned the color of a toaster coil. A line of fire, neat as a ruler at first, sprinted across my waist-high wheat and then, like it remembered physics, vaulted the drainage swale toward the HOA's vinyl fence parade. Someone yelled that it was heading for Birch Court. Another voice, shriller, asked why the wind was doing that. I stood at my gate with a garden hose that would have been better as a straw and watched Celeste Wright, our HOA Karen, drop a tiki torch and run like a scandal. The flames moved faster than her expensive running shoes could carry her, and I could see the exact moment she realized that clip-art fire and real fire have very different personalities. My name is Owen Martell. I do GIS mapping for the county and prefer quiet things like sourdough starters, radio cricket scores, and yes, a small 2-acre wheat plot behind my house. It's legal, planted on the old parcel that predated Larkspur Downs by 40 years. I harvest with a borrowed combine, sell the grain to a micromill, and turn the straw into mulch for neighbors who ask nicely. The wheat is a heritage variety called Red Fife, planted every spring and ready by late summer. It's beautiful when it ripens, golden and waist-high, moving in waves when the wind picks up. To me it's peaceful. To Celeste Wright, HOA president, power walker, visor as stiff as her smile, it's apparently a personal insult. She calls my field visual clutter and a fuel load, which is rich considering the neighborhood's fetish for mulch volcanoes around baby trees and the decorative hay bales that appear on every porch come October. She left notes suggesting I consider ornamental grasses instead, printed on HOA letterhead with little clip-art gavels in the corners. I replied once politely, with my agricultural exemption paperwork stapled to a copy of the county burn ban notice magnet to my fridge. I even highlighted the relevant sections in yellow. She responded by scheduling a special meeting to discuss non-conforming land use, which is HOA speak for we don't like what you're doing and we'll make it stop. The campaign ramped up like a bad political ad. Citations for overheight vegetation, even though agricultural parcels are exempt from landscape restrictions. Rumors on Nextdoor about pest harborage, posted by accounts that were clearly Celeste using her husband's and daughter's names. A glossy pamphlet titled Wildfire Risk Reduction Initiative that showed stock photos of mountains we don't have and statistics from California that don't apply to our flat Midwest suburb. Celeste began safety patrols, meaning she would stride along the easement filming my wheat on her phone like it insulted her Pilates instructor. She'd narrate too, loud enough for me to hear. This is a clear and present danger to property values. Look at the density. No fire breaks. Absolute negligence. I ignored most of it. I'm good at ignoring things. It's a survival skill you develop when you deal with bureaucracy for a living. Then came the monthly HOA meeting in July, the one where Celeste unveiled her controlled burn plan to restore community aesthetics. She had a slideshow. It was 12 slides long and featured clip-art flames dancing around words like proactive and stakeholder engagement. Slide 7 was a permit she claimed gave the board authority to conduct vegetation management, which turned out to be a PDF of last year's barbecue guidelines with the words community cookout crossed out and controlled burn written in with a different font. When I pointed this out, Celeste said the board had inherent authority under the safety provisions of the covenants. I said clearly, loudly enough that the recording secretary looked up, that we were under a county-wide burn ban until the first rain, which hadn't fallen since May. Also, my wheat was a legal agricultural crop on exempt land. Touch it and I would see her in court. Celeste smiled the way cats smile at aquariums, all teeth and patience. Harvest was a week away. The grain was perfect, kernels hard and ready, the kind of yield that makes you forget about the aphids in June. On a windy Thursday afternoon, the kind of wind that makes flags snap and sends patio furniture skittering, I returned from the co-op to find 3 HOA board members in reflective vests at my back fence. Celeste held a propane torch, the kind you use for weeds, except she was pointing it at my wheat. Frank from Lot 19 had a rake like it was a badge of office. Deb from Lot 32 stood farther back with a phone, filming what I assumed she thought would be a triumphant moment of community stewardship. Celeste saw me and smiled. "We're commencing mitigation," she announced in the voice of someone who practices announcements in the mirror. Per the board's authority under Section 12.3 of the Covenants. She didn't wait for a response. She lit the field at the edge. Just a little line of fire, she said, was to singe the worst of it. Just the perimeter. Just enough to send a message. Within 3 seconds, the line of flame became a sprint. The wind, which had been bending the wheat all day, did its job. So did physics. The fire hopped the first row, then the second, then it wasn't rows anymore, just a rolling orange wave that coughed embers into the air like dandelion seeds made of light. The embers landed in the decorative grasses along the swale. Then the mulch. Then the wood chips Celeste herself had mandated for every tree well in the subdivision. Someone screamed to call 911. I think it was Deb. Frank dropped his rake and started running toward his own house like he suddenly remembered it was downwind. Celeste shouted that it was under control, that this was normal, that everyone needed to stay calm, but the fire made a liar of her in real time. I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and reported a structure threat and illegal burn during an active county ban. Then I did what any GIS nerd with a drone license would do. I launched my quadcopter from the bed of my truck and put it in tracking mode. Within 90 seconds, I had 4K footage of the ignition point, the spread pattern, and Celeste's heroic attempt to stomp out a grass fire while wearing foam clogs. She looked like she was trying to teach the ground a lesson about respect. Engines arrived from 3 stations. I could hear the sirens from 2 miles out, that rising wail that makes your gut tighten even when you're not the one in trouble. The first truck came in from the east access road and the crew deployed so fast it looked choreographed. The incident commander, a woman with a face like a hatchet and shoulders that suggested she didn't need help moving furniture, looked at the wind sock snapping due east, the fire line already 60 feet into the neighborhood green space, and my drone feed on her tablet. Then she turned to Celeste, who was still holding the propane torch like it might somehow exonerate her, and asked in the voice teachers use on pranksters who authorized ignition. Celeste presented her barbecue permit printout like a talisman blessed by higher powers. The commander lifted an eyebrow so high it needed aviation clearance. The fire crews backed the line with foam and shovels, cut a scratch break along the fence line, and blacklined my field with a kind of competence that made me want to bake them pies for the rest of the year. They saved the birch court mailboxes by 10 feet and kept the fire from jumping to the Henderson's deck by what looked like sheer spite against entropy. Within 40 minutes the fire was out. Within 50 minutes the county fire marshal arrived, a man named Kowalski who looked like he'd been personally offended by every illegal burn since 1973. He read the burn ban order dated June 1st in a voice that could have stripped paint, then took statements under a camcorder that felt like a guillotine with a lens. I handed over everything I had. My agricultural exemption paperwork, notarized and current. Copies of the 4 certified letters I'd sent the HOA since May, each one explaining the burn ban and my legal right to farm the parcel. The drone footage, time-stamped and geotagged, showing the exact moment Celeste lit the torch and the exact direction of the wind. A screenshot of her controlled burn agenda slide from the July meeting, complete with her clip art flames and fake permit. I also gave him the next door screenshots where Celeste had posted under 3 different accounts about the necessity of removing the fuel load, which she'd helpfully failed to make private. The marshal watched the drone video twice, zoomed in on Celeste's face during ignition, and asked her directly if she had consulted his office before proceeding. She said they consulted the bylaws. The marshal wrote in his notebook for a very long time. His pen made angry little scratching sounds. Emergency meeting, clubhouse, 7 p.m., air still smoky enough to taste. Every seat was full. People who never came to meetings showed up because their fences had scorch marks and their mulch beds were now mulch ash. The fire marshal stood at the front with a projector remote and the kind of calm that comes before sentencing. He presented the facts in numbered points. Illegal ignition during an active county-wide burn ban. Criminal negligence in fire management. Property endangerment of at least 17 structures. Interference with legal agricultural production on exempt land. Reckless disregard for public safety during red flag wind conditions. The police officer next to him, a sergeant named Diaz who looked like he'd been hoping for a quiet Thursday, played my drone video on the projector screen. There was Celeste, striking the torch. There was Frank, cheering like it was a gender reveal. There was the fire, immediate and hungry, vaulting the swale toward their own cul-de-sac like it had a personal grudge. The room made the sound of 1,000 HOA members realizing the insurance deductible is not imaginary. Then the HOA's insurance agent, patched in on speakerphone because apparently he'd been calling the board president every 15 minutes since the fire trucks left, delivered the finishing blow. His voice had the flat professionalism of someone reading terms and conditions that are about to ruin your year. Intentional fire acts void coverage under Section 9 of your liability policy. The association is not covered for this incident. Individual directors may be personally liable for all damages, suppression costs, and third-party claims. There was a pause where you could hear Celeste's breathing over the speakerphone static. Then someone asked what that meant in dollars. The agent said he'd have a full estimate by Monday, but initial suppression costs alone were running $15,000 and climbing. Celeste's face did math, then grief, then the kind of pale you see on wallpaper in foreclosed houses. Someone motioned to remove her as president effective immediately. Someone else seconded it. The vote was 11-1, and the one was Celeste voting for herself out of what I assume was muscle memory. The fire marshal, who had clearly been waiting for this exact moment, issued citations on the spot. One for illegal burn, one for reckless endangerment, one for violation of agricultural protections. He served Celeste with notice of a civil claim from the county for suppression costs, which he noted would include the mutual aid costs from the 2 neighboring districts who'd sent engines. Then Sergeant Diaz stood up and mentioned that the district attorney's office, already notified by the marshal, would be adding a criminal charge of reckless burning under state statute, which carried penalties he would outline in the formal charging documents to follow. My turn. I stood up, walked to the front, and slid a folder across the table. It landed in front of the new interim president, a man named Gene who'd been treasurer and looked like he wished he'd stayed home. Inside were itemized estimates. Crop loss based on expected yield and current market prices for organic heritage wheat. Soil remediation because burning disrupts the microbial ecosystem I've been cultivating for 6 years. Fence repair where the fire had warped the posts. Lost income from pre-orders I'd already taken from the micromill and 3 local bakeries. I also included a draft settlement offer. The HOA would fund complete reseeding for next spring. They would pay me the market value of this year's destroyed harvest, plus a 25% penalty for the illegal destruction of agricultural products. And they would sponsor a mandatory fire safety seminar for all residents, taught by the actual fire department, with attendance recorded and reported. If they refused any part of this, I'd see them in court with exhibits A through Z and a lawyer who specialized in agricultural tort law. Gene looked at the numbers, looked at Celeste, and looked like he was considering new hobbies that didn't involve governing. The gavel came down harder than Celeste's face fell. The board secretary, a retired accountant with reading glasses on a chain, read the totals out loud in the voice of someone who'd been waiting years to watch this specific board implode. $15,000 in county suppression costs, possibly more pending final accounting. $8,000 in crop loss and remediation payable to Owen Martell. A $5,000 fine from the fire marshal's office. 200 hours of court-ordered community service. And the reckless burning charge carried a potential sentence of up to 1 year in county jail and an additional $10,000 fine if convicted at trial. The secretary looked up and added that these figures did not include legal fees, which the HOA would now be paying since the insurance wouldn't cover willful misconduct. Celeste stood there in her reflective vest and foam clogs, her visor finally crooked, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to argue with gravity itself. She managed no coherent words, just a sound somewhere between a gasp and the word but, stretched out like taffy. Frank from Lot 19 had already edged toward the exit door. Deb from Lot 32 was crying quietly into her phone. The new interim president asked Celeste directly if she understood the charges and the consequences. Celeste nodded once, a tiny mechanical motion, and sat down hard in a folding chair that squeaked under the weight of her completely ruined authority.